Some people are still told by their healthcare profession just to take 5 units of insulin and eat your breakfast. And this sort of like blanket approach does not really work.
You're not necessarily going to need the same amount of insulin for your breakfast every day.
So how do you decide on the dose, Crystal?
I do a few things. First thing I do is,
If you get everything right, you might be able to get to perfect straight line.
okay, so this is actually a pro tip.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Diabetes Unlocked podcast. I'm Tom.
And I'm Christelle, and between us, we have over 60 years of experience living with type 1 diabetes.
And in this episode, we'll talk all about dosing and timing of insulin for meals. How exactly we do it to avoid those frustrating blood sugar spikes.
So we'll talk about how we calculate our doses, when we take our insulin for different foods, different situations, and we'll just get into some real life strategies on how we keep our blood sugars in range.
That's right. And I will also tell you why I usually take insulin exactly 60 minutes before I start eating. So let's get into it.
Absolutely. I love this topic, by the way. It's one of those questions that I actually get a lot whenever I'm talking with diabuddies or, interacting with people online is, well, how do you actually calculate your insulin doses for food? Because if we don't, we end up with those pesky high blood sugars or way too low blood sugars. And that's not really what we're aiming for, right? I know that you kind of wanted to give a little bit of background information, Tom. So maybe you start out with that so that people know kind of why we're talking about this.
Yes, definitely. And you mentioned that when we chatted a little bit before this episode that, some people are still told by their healthcare profession just to, maybe take 5 units of insulin and eat your breakfast or eat your lunch. And this sort of like blanket approach we both seen in our lives, it does not really work for someone who lives with diabetes to just do this every time for every meal and to take the insulin at the same time and the same dose, regardless of what we eat. It just doesn't work. And I just wanted to briefly explain how things work in a healthy body when somebody who doesn't have diabetes eats insulin, because I think that kind of helps me at least understand why I do the things the way I do them. So, when somebody who's healthy eats a meal that has some carbohydrates, usually the carbohydrates get digested quite fast and the glucose enters the bloodstream and that raises blood sugar. And so I'm not a doctor, but I think how it works is when the brain kind of figures, okay, the insulin is going up, then it gives a signal to the pancreas, and the pancreas starts releasing insulin, a hormone called insulin, which the two of us don't produce, but a healthy person does. And it sort of happens real time, if I have the right understanding. So when the person needs insulin, it's like immediately released, it goes to the bloodstream and it starts lowering the blood sugar right away, almost. So it's not, someone who is healthy doesn't have those blood sugar spikes to 250 or 300 like we sometimes do when we don't get the insulin dose and timing right. And so when that insulin is released, that kind of helps to take that glucose from blood to the cells for storage. And so it all happens real time. But we don't make insulin. Our pancreas doesn't make any insulin, so we need to inject it externally. And for me, it's really important when I inject insulin to get the right dose to cover whatever I eat at the right time, to be able to offset that blood sugar spike and make the insulin work exactly when the carbs are hitting the blood. It's a very simple way I think about it. It's not very scientific, but that's what I always think about when I think about using my insulin to avoid going too high or too low after I eat. Get the right dose at the right time. Does that make sense to you, Crystal? Do you think about it the same way, or am I completely off?
No, not at all. So I think about it as waves. So I think about it as if we could see sort of our blood sugars as being a wave. Then we see our blood sugars come up. That's a wave. The wave goes up as the food is digested and released into our bloodstream. Insulin is the other wave. And when that injected, that comes in, it lowers the blood sugar. So I guess it's an inverted wave. And what we need to do is we need to figure out a way of, to the best of our abilities, match those two waves so that they hit approximately the same time. That's kind of how we can even out our blood sugars. And I think back to that little discussion that we had earlier about should you just take one dose for each meal, or should you do something different, which is what both you and I do, which is count your carbs and assess how many units of insulin you need per meal, or corrections. It's also corrections, right? And I think the big downside to the strategy that's just take one amount of insulin is that you're not necessarily going to need the same amount of insulin for your breakfast every day. You might eat something different, or your blood sugars might be out of range. They might be high, they might be low, or this might be one of those days where you didn't sleep that well, or you're sick, or something else is going on. So as we talked about on the previous episodes, there's up to like 42 things that can impact blood sugars. And if you don't think about at least some of these things, I think it's going to be really, really hard to keep blood sugars in range after meals, actually also between meals. So I would say one of the things, so let's take my breakfast, for example. I'm recording this in the morning. Tom and I are in different time zones. So maybe we talk about our last meals and it's going to be like the different ones. But I had breakfast, like an hour and a half ago. And what I do in the morning when I get up, first of all, right now, I want to emphasize right now because things change. But right now, what I do is when I wake up in the morning, I use MDI, multiple daily injections. I do not use an insulin pump. What I do in the morning is I check my blood sugars. I use the CGM, continuous glucose monitor, but I check my blood sugars. And most mornings, I take one and a half unit to counter a rise in my blood sugars that I usually have in the morning. A lot of us do. And then I start thinking about what else am I doing? It's a big component. Am I going to the gym, or am I going to sit here and chat with Tom? Where's my blood sugar at? Did that 1.5 unit, 1 unit, did it take care of that rise or not? Do I need more insulin? What am I eating? I actually think about, how fast is what I'm eating going to hit my bloodstream? So I would say, I think those are the three main. Am I missing something, Tom? Current blood sugar, what am I doing? What am I eating?
Yes, I think these are the main components.
Yeah.
What's the current blood sugar? I would almost say maybe not only what's the current blood sugar, but also where it's moving. Like, is the arrow pointing up? Is it pointing down? Like, where it's going? I think that's one of the components as well. And then how much I'm gonna eat and what kind of food it is. So you said what I'm eating, but I think about it in two ways, like how much, like the quantity, and the second thing, like what it is. It's just because that also has a little bit of impact. But it's just other words of describing what you just said. And I know I like how you said there are two waves that need to kind of work against each other: insulin and the food or the carbohydrates impacting the blood sugar. And I heard many people, or a few people, describing this as a tug of war. I don't know if you know tug of war, where there are two teams pulling a rope in different direction and there is a flag in the middle. And so I think that's a great illustration of this, and it's not something I came up with, but I heard this illustration, or just a way to describe it, that the carbs in the meal will start pulling really strong in one direction after you eat, and you kind of want to have that insulin pulling in the other direction so that carbs don't win. And we're going to talk about like how to do it, or exactly that the carbs don't win. But it's whenever my blood sugar spikes too high after eating, that's kind of like I see the carbs kind of won. The fight either didn't happen because I didn't take enough insulin, or it just happened too late, and the carbs won. And I don't want the carbs to win. So we're going to talk about strategies how to kind of get there. But I like that picture of pulling the rope and just not having it pulled too far in one of the directions.
So yeah, we don't want the carbs to win. So I realized that I missed one more thing, which is active insulin on board, which is something that's really relevant, especially for us on MDI.
Right.
So for not having the carbs to win, there's a lot of different parts that you have to think about. There's also, and we can talk about this, there's a lot of tools to help you think about this for you, so you don't have to do all the math in your head, because the kind of joke is that we need an advanced mathematics degree to live with diabetes successfully, right? There's a lot going on for sure. And I'd say in the morning, the main things for me is the dose. The secondary thing is the timing, because that's kind of what you're talking about. Is like, how much should I take and when should I take it? The main thing for me is to get the dose right. I also want to get the timing right, but there's going to be situations where that's not really possible, for example, in a restaurant or something like that. And at that point, I don't really prioritize timing as high. But again, I'll focus on the dose.
So how do you decide on the dose, Crystal? Like specifically, what do you do to decide, okay, I'm gonna, so this will be my breakfast, I need 5 units.
Yeah. So what I do is I do something called carb counting, which is, again, in contrast to what we talked about before, which is just like a set dose for your meals. So I look up my meals and I weigh out my carbohydrates on a kitchen scale. Anyone who's listened to more than one episode from this knows that I love my kitchen scale. So I'll weigh things out and I will actually lock it in a free app that's called MyFitnessPal. This is not a plug for MyFitnessPal. You can use whatever. But what I like is that I put in, let's say I'm eating and I'm still thinking in grams. So that's like 2.5 ounces of banana. I'll put that into the app and it'll tell me how many carbohydrates it is. So okay, so this is actually a pro tip to MyFitnessPal. If you have it on your phone, if you tap in everything, you have your phone vertically. If you flip it horizontally, it'll actually add all the carbohydrates up together and it'll tell you the total amount. I learned this at one point when I dropped my phone. So it was kind of like an accidentally, oh, wow, it can do this. So now it's the first step. I have my carbs. The next thing is I look at my IOBs and my active insulin on board, how many units do I already have on board. I look at my blood sugars. I use, complete honesty here, I use the arrow. So again, on my Dexcom, it'll give me an arrow up, down, straight, depending on how my blood sugars are faring. I don't use that piece of information every time. I should. I don't. I should use it every time. I don't. But if, for example, I have 2 arrows up, which usually doesn't happen right before a meal, but let's say I do, I will take that into consideration and I will consider adding a bit more insulin. Have different carb ratios, which is something I think we need to talk about, which means how many units of insulin do you need for the carbs? So a lot of people go into the doctor's office and they get said, like, you have a carb ratio 1:10. Fully arbitrary number, but that means that 1 unit of insulin would cover 10 grams of carbs. So I have carb ratios for different times a day. And then I do the math. I don't do the math. I use something called an InPen, which is a smart insulin pen, and it does the math for me. All I have to do is type in my blood sugars and my carbohydrates, and it does all the math for me. There are online calculators as well if you don't want to do this math, or you can do the math by yourself. But I would say, yeah, measure my carbohydrates, add that into the equation, insulin on board, and the time of day, which determines my carb ratio.
So that's really smart. So you're saying you're adding all the food or everything you're going to eat into the app, and it will sort of add things up and tell you, okay, the total is 50 or 60, and the app does the math for you. Because I don't do this kind of thing. That's actually smart. So you say MyFitnessPal can do that, right? It's a
free
version of doing it. Okay.
I
Yeah,
don't
they might
the advanced version.
Right. There might be some other apps too, I think, but I don't do this, and I can imagine, like, sometimes I'm finding myself doing some calculations in my head, but it's not as convenient. But I hear you saying that you really go off your insulin to carb ratio. So you take the carb count, you apply the insulin to carb ratio, that you calculate the dose, and that's what you inject. There are some other things that you consider that you describe, but it's interesting to hear that you're going off the carb count. Like compared to my approach, you're pretty heavily on the carb counting side, because I know carb counting is super helpful in certain situations, but I just find for myself, I don't do it that often. What I do more often is I just sort of eyeball whatever I'm going to eat and say, okay, this is 40 carbs, or this is 60 carbs, or 10 carbs. And sometimes I get it wrong, of course, but I usually like recalibrate. And I almost like not really say, okay, this bowl is 40 carbs or 60 carbs. I almost think in my head in like units, how many units, because it's just more simple for me that way. And it's just by learning this, it works better for me because it's a bit easier for me to recalibrate. I feel like my insulin to carb ratio is not always the same, and it changes not so much between the morning and evening, but more between, let's say, 1 week to another week, or 1 day to another day, depending on like how physically active I am, or how, things like that. And that immediate like recalibration that I do all the time with just this eyeballing, it might sound like a very crazy approach, but for me, I find it to work better, because I look at the plate and I like almost say, okay, this is 5 units, this is 7 units, and not thinking carbs that much in my head. If I'm eating something super new and I know it's in a package and there is carb content written on it, then I will use that, because I don't have experience with that specific meal. But I found myself like really that sort of like guesstimating approach and recalibrating my eyeballs instead of using a scale and carb counting is just more convenient for me, and it works. It's just a different way. Sometimes I need to write things down to sort of remember and to memorize certain meals that I eat quite often. But I feel we take slightly different approach here to deciding, okay, what should be the right dose of insulin? Should it be 5 units? Should it be 7 units? You go of like more scientific method. I go more like soft skill kind of way, or just estimating. And I guess that's okay. Like other people might have different approaches, and that might work better for different people. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Well, I mean, it seems like you do it based off of experience, right? So you're based.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna analyze your brain. I'm guessing that your brain is doing a lot of the things that I'm doing, just like based on experience. You're looking at your plate, and your brain is automatically going, okay, there's a clump of carbs over there, there's a clump of carbs over there. I know that that's kind of like that requires, let's say, 2 units for that amount. And I think that's another really cool way of doing it. And I've seen diabetes educators teach people how to do, let's say, carb counting that way, where they're like, okay, visually, this clump of rice or this potato or this whatever it is equals, about 2 units of insulin for you. So I think that's really valuable, by the way, because that's a different ways of doing it. And it's, for example, in the restaurant, it's like, as I mentioned before, I'm not going to pull out a kitchen scale because that's just not me. I'm not going to do that. So in that situation, I'll be looking at my plate, trying to evaluate, okay, which are the components that are going to impact my blood sugars really fast, and which ones are going to be like impacting them later on when we talk about fats or proteins. But can I just talk a little bit more about the carb ratio, actually? Because if one thing is doing it like Tom is saying, and as I say, I also do that when I'm out. But for the carb ratio, if you're sitting at home, you go like, hey, I want to try this out. How do I find my carb ratio? So your medical team should be helpful with this. They're not always. So you can figure it out by yourself. As I said, in my experience, most doctors starts with a 1 to 10, meaning that 1 unit of rapid-acting insulin, so it's your mealtime insulin, not your long-acting insulin, your mealtime insulin, theoretically, it should cover around 10 grams of carbs. The way that I do it, I test it out. So to your point, Tom, you said, hey, your carb ratio, how much insulin you need for amount of carbs might change from week to week. I change my carb ratios if I notice that things are changing. And the way that I adjust, and let's say that I actually think mine is 1 to 8 in the morning right now. What I do is I also take notes and I look at my data. And if I see that 1 to 8 is not working, meaning that my blood sugars after the meal are too high or too low, I change it. And the way, so if it's too high, that means I need more insulin. That actually means the carb ratio needs to go down. That sounds super weird, I know, but that would mean that maybe the 1 unit insulin only covers 7 grams of carbs, right? So I adjusted myself. I highly recommend that if you want to play around with your carb ratios, talk to your medical team. But once you get comfortable and once you have it sort of talked it through with your medical team, you probably will be empowered to do this by yourself.
And I think 1 to 10 is maybe a safe way to experiment. Like if you have no idea, like if I had no idea, I would probably start with 1 to 10. Or like if I wanted to be super careful and felt like 1 to 10 is maybe too aggressive, I would maybe start like 1 to 15. I know mine is fluctuating somewhere between 10 and 15 from my experience, depending on the time of the week and the day or whatever, or my life in general. But I think there is a simple way to test the insulin to carb ratio is just to, when you have something that's measured, it's 10 grams of carbs and you take 1 unit of insulin at a point when your glucose is relatively stable, and just wait for those probably 3 hours for the insulin to work through the life cycle, so be out of the body, and also the carbs to be digested. And then you see where you land. Assuming the glucose was flat without the impact of the insulin and the food, if the 1 to 10 is correct ratio for you, then you should land at the same number. If you start at 100, you should land in 3 hours or 3.5 hours at 100 again. If you land at 120 or 80, that indicates, okay, maybe you need to be a little bit more aggressive or a little bit less aggressive. That's how I test mine at the end of the day. That's how I recalibrate my eyeballs. It's just that I don't do it in terms of carb to insulin ratio, but in terms of the specific meal. So one thing you mentioned I wanted to ask, and I didn't yet. You said you have different, or you use different ratios in the morning and in the evening. Could you maybe talk a bit more about that? How you do it and why?
So, I mean, most of us are more insulin sensitive in the afternoons, evening versus the morning. So we're more insulin resistant in the morning, meaning we'll need more insulin to cover food, blood sugar spikes, all of that. So my carb ratios reflects that. And again, yours might not. That's totally cool to say that for a lot of people, this is the case. This can be challenging when you manage your blood sugars with insulin pens like I do, because it can be a lot to keep track of. So again, I use technology. I use my InPen app to help me calculate this. If you don't have access to one, there are a really good app outside the US. It's called Rapid Calc. Rapid CALC. If you're in the US and you still want to download it, you can. There's some tricks to that. You just have to go on there as if you're a European, for example, or Canadian phone. But anyway, there are some different tools. There's also some browser calculators that can help you do this. So the reason, again, why I have different ones is that I've noticed that I have different insulin needs at different time of day. I adjust. Given that I have it then programmed in my app as, I don't remember the exact program right now, but breakfast, I said it's 1 to 8, I think. And then lunch is 1 to 10, maybe dinner is 1 to 11. That just means that it's going to help me calculate different doses for different times a day. I know that in insulin pumps, that's really easy to set. Most of them can have up to 8 different ratios, 6 to 8, something like that. If you don't have access to any technology at all, or if this becomes too complicated, I would just stick with one and sort of make adjustments around that. Because one thing is the carb ratios, but then there's also the correction factors, which means, well, if your blood sugar is out of range, how much insulin will it, for example, take to bring it down? Or how much insulin would you have to take out to make sure that you don't go low? So it can become a little complicated if you want to try and do all that in your head, which is, again, goes back to, I highly recommend finding some sort of calculator and using that.
Insulin pumps are really good because they are doing these kind of things for you. They think of the correction, they think of the carb ratio applying to your carb count to come up to the dose. One thing they are not that good is they don't know what's going to be happening in the next 2-3 hours. Like the pump just doesn't know. And another thing is it doesn't know really it's not all pumps have the settings that you can tell what type of food you will be eating, because that also matters. And maybe we can get into those other components as well, because for me, like, to get as close to the flat line blood sugar after the meal, I need to have like three components to my dose. It needs to be like the right dose, but it also needs to be the right timing, as we already said, and also the correction, which you just described. So these 3 things need to be part of, I think, every injection before a meal that I'm doing. And like, for me, timing is super important. So if you don't mind, I would like to go into that one now, unless you have something else with the dose to add to, how you decide on how many units. We can talk about when.
I mean, the only thing I would add to that is we only talked about carbohydrates right now, just because that's the main thing that's going to raise your blood sugars really quickly. You might also have to dose for, and this you might get into that now, but you also want to consider what else is in your meal.
Right.
So
that's a good point, and that's actually one of the reasons why I think I use this kind of guesstimating approach. I like it because the carb counting doesn't really reflect proteins and fats, and they do impact blood sugar as well. So it's sometimes beneficial to incorporate that element. And if we go solely by carb counting and deciding the dose only based on carb counting, there's no way to incorporate the fat and the protein into the equation, and we need to do it somewhere at the back end.
Which I guess is what I do. So if I have a low protein, I'll often add like an extra unit to take care of the protein. And if I have a lot of fat, and then we can talk about timing, I might time my insulin differently.
Yeah. So maybe let's talk about the timing.
Take it away.
So I would say, but I would start with making just like a very short statement. I think taking insulin and start eating right away most of the time is not the right thing to do. At least for me. Most of the time when I do it, I will just go higher. My blood sugar will go higher than I would love for it to see it after the meal. If I take my insulin and eat right away, and that that kind of leads into why I said, okay, most of the time I do 16 minutes because I found, okay, that's the right time, and I will explain a little bit later why. But I think in general, those rapid-acting insulins that we use these days, most of them have this 15-minute, at least 15-minute time before they actually start, before they get into the bloodstream and start working. So that makes me think like, wait, the 15 minutes should probably be like the baseline. From my experience, it is the baseline for me when to take insulin, so that it starts pulling early enough before the carbs start pulling the rope too strong. And so 15 minutes with most meals work for me. Why I say 16 is because with insulin pump, it just takes about a minute or two for the dose to like get through the system. And this is why I add like 1 more minute. And as I told you before, I usually set a timer on my phone after I inject myself, like when I want to eat. And that's why I set 16 minutes, not 15, just because of that. So that's 1 minute extra I just give for the pump to sort of give me the dose, because it usually takes a while. When you have a shot from an insulin pen, it's in right away. You don't have to wait that 1 extra minutes. But that's just a little nitty-gritty, I guess. It's not a deal breaker. That's why.
I've never heard that before. That's brilliant. I just saw my face. I'm like, what? This is like, okay, no. I love it. First time you said 16 minutes, I was like, oh, he said it wrong. He meant 15, because to your point, we're always told 15. That's a really good point. I don't always do 15. I sometimes do way more, way more, especially in the morning. Not so much afternoon and evening, but more, as I said, I'm more insulin resistant in the morning. So often I will do my 1.5 unit when I wake up, just to take care of the rise, which has nothing to do with carbohydrates, fat, or protein. It's just my body releasing glucose from muscles, liver, making me ready for the day, making my blood sugars go up, which is nice. So I counter that. And then I often do whatever I need. I'm a turtle in the morning. I'm super slow. I don't know where time goes. All of a sudden, an hour's gone by, and I'm just like, I did nothing. Maybe I like browse the news, whatever. So then I inject my rapid-acting insulin in my injectable rapid-acting insulin for breakfast. And I'll often then, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Then I'll start working or something. And I'll often not start eating my breakfast until I see my blood sugars start trending downwards. So, for example, again, this morning, I was really happy. I woke up around 100 milligrams per deciliter. Perfect for me. I was happy with that. And then the second I woke up, it started climbing upwards. I did my unit. It came up to 124, I think, something like that. And then it started to trend downwards. And I didn't eat until I was down towards 100 again. Right.
Okay.
So it kind of like, I kept an eye on it. I mess this up sometimes, because sometimes I forget to keep an eye on it, and all of a sudden it's like, you're going to go low soon. All my alarms are going like, beep, 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 which is not ideal. I think you already taught me once, like Christelle used to set an alarm, and I was like, yes, I'm going to start doing that. And I have not started doing that, but it's a new routine. Routines take time. So yeah, sometimes we call it pre-bolus way earlier. I will say one thing though, because what we're talking about is the traditional injectable rapid acting, so mealtime insulins, because there's also, both you and I have used it, the inhaled insulin, which is also mealtime insulin, and it just works much faster. I don't use it for everything. I'll tell you why, but it's that's one of those insulins that I then take when I see my blood sugar start to go up. So sometimes I take it right when I eat, and sometimes I wait until I start seeing a blood sugar impact. The reason why I don't use it for every meal is that I don't think it's precise enough. It is very effective, but it's only in set doses, and I don't want to eat the exact amount of carbohydrates to go with the dose. I want to eat the food that I want to eat, and I want to take the insulin that matches that. So this is probably also going back to, I want to live my life like I want to live my life. I refuse to let my diabetes and the insulin I have access to limit how I live my life.
Yeah. But I like what you said. Of course, living your life, I love that. But I like what you said before, like you wait for the arrow to come down, because I think that's also a good way to time the meal. If you have this like longer pre-bolus time situation in the morning, and I don't do it like this, but I like this approach, because when you see that line is turning downwards, maybe you get an arrow like slightly down. That's when the insulin is really kicking in. And when you start eating, it'll probably be right in time for you not to go too low. Of course, if you forget to eat, that's a problem. You will go too low. But that's the right time with most meals, I think, from my experience, when you see that change in the trend to kind of start eating. And also the other way you described with Afrezza, because Afrezza works so fast, the inhalable insulin, that it kind of makes sense, especially when you eat something that's doesn't impacting your blood sugar so dramatically right away, to just wait once you see the blood sugar rising and then take the insulin that will kind of work again on the against the carbohydrates. So that makes a whole lot of sense. I'm a little bit slow too today. It's not the morning here, but I find myself a bit slow. I know it's for you, it's mornings. We're two turtles today. But on the timing, I think there is like a lot of more things that go into that. Like especially like not all carbs are created equal and not impact the blood sugar in the same way. And so when I say 16 minutes pre-bolus time, I think it's not always the right one. It works for me with most of the meals, but there will be some meals where I need more and some meals where I need less. Maybe we could touch on that, like what meals, if there are any meals that you apply a little bit different rules around the pre-bolusing and the timing.
Well, I think the main one is what I mentioned, like high fat or higher fat. So what's high fat really depends on the person, I found. Talking to people over the years, it seems like for some people, I think especially if they're not used to eating a lot of fat, then a plate with 15 grams of fat can be kind of high. I generally say a little bit higher, and high fat can be from avocado or from oil. It doesn't have to be potato chips, although potato chips are good. That's been a theme in a lot of our episodes. We talked about potato chips, which is funny. But what I do is fat slows down the digestion. Basically means that the glucose is not going to hit the bloodstream as fast, and you might see it hit in waves. So for higher fat meals, I will often not pre-bolus as aggressively as if I am eating something that's a little bit more a raw carb, meaning it's not accompanied by, it's a naked carb, meaning it's not accompanied by any fats or protein. We'll pre-bolus it a little bit more aggressively because that's going to hit the bloodstream faster. So I do think about it. Sometimes I'm more successful than others, but it's something that's in the back of my mind. How about you?
Yeah. I mean, I find meals that I eat often for breakfast, like oatmeal, that for these I really need at least 20 minutes or even 25 would be okay. And maybe that's also pointing a little bit, maybe my pre-bolus time in the morning is also a little bit longer like yours, but I also say, okay, oatmeal or oats, this has really high glycemic index. Whatever has higher glycemic index, I would generally need more pre-bolus time. And so I extend to 20-25 minutes with like a lot of like healthy food, like let's say brown rice with some lentil or a lot of greens. I just need way less, like 5-10 minutes pre-bolus time. And speaking of fats, today for lunch, I had white rice, salmon, avocado, and like a fajita kind of sauce. I made everything myself, so it was not processed except for the white rice. But I didn't do any pre-bolus, and I didn't even go high after eating this. My blood sugar was pretty much flat, although I ate white rice, and a lot of people say white rice will spike you like crazy. Like when you combine the meals in certain way, and it's a lot of whole foods, and the rest of the plate is whole foods. It was actually not, and I was surprised. I didn't want to wait. That's why I didn't do pre-bolus. Normally I would do 5 minutes, probably 10 minutes, but I didn't do any pre-bolus, and I still didn't spike. So sometimes the other components make a big difference. But I would say in general, like I'm anywhere between 0 up to 30 minutes, really depending what it is. If more than half an hour, I would only do if my blood sugar is high. So I would want to correct first before I eat. But I think more than 30 minutes for me it's a no-go. Like I cannot do the thing that you do in the morning. Like I take my pre-meal bolus and I start working, and then maybe in 45 minutes I go eat my breakfast. I would definitely go low.
I wonder if it's also because you're on an insulin pump. So being on an insulin pump, you get rapid acting insulin delivered 24/7, right? I'm multiple daily injections. So my background insulin is a long-acting insulin. I'm currently using Basaglar, which is kind of the same as Lantus or similar. It lasts about 24 hours, and it works differently in the body, right? It's the same, and this is me speculating. I don't know if this is the case, but I'm just thinking since you already have rapid acting insulin going, you're just adding a little bit more to that. If I, for example, have no rapid acting insulin going, I only have my basal insulin, it takes a little while for it to kick in.
Yeah, I think you have a point there, and it really depends because the pump, especially one that's automated delivery system, it might be giving you more or less background insulin at different time of day. So if you are naturally going a little bit higher in the morning, the pump will kick in. So I will definitely have more rapid acting insulin in my body early in the morning. On the other hand, if I go for a walk and my blood sugar will start going low before lunch, the pump will just suspend and it will stop giving me insulin until it sees, I'm not going low anymore. So I will actually have way less rapid acting on board. So it's sort of could count as part of the pre-bolus. So if there is a lot of basal going in before you even check your pre-meal blood sugar and do the pre-meal dose, then you kind of have like a little bit of pre-bolus from somewhere you don't even know about it. Like it's not shown anywhere, but it's already there. So I think you have a point, but it depends on the situation. That's one thing I like about Omnipod, that it shows you this line in your graph that is either red when it's not giving you any insulin, when it's suspending to prevent a hypo. You will see a red line, and then you see you're actually not getting any background insulin, and you can take that into account when you want to eat, when you want to bolus, just do like a little bit longer pre-bolus. Or it shows you orange line when it's giving you max dose of basal insulin, and then you could ease out on that pre-meal insulin if that makes sense. But I think only Omnipod can do this. And then there's sort of variation of this on the system that I use, the DIY one. But yeah, definitely it has something to do with the pump as well.
Yeah. Well, it's just also for people listening. I mean, I know not everyone is going to be pumpers, not everybody's going to be MDIS. So actually, I also know that not everyone is going to have a CGM. So not everyone is going to be able to see the arrows. Have you any experience? I mean, we both grew up with diabetes before CGMs, so I'm sure you have some experience. But something that you can share about, well, how would you do a lot of these things if you only have finger sticks?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think with finger sticks, I would like even more like hone onto those three parts of any kind of pre-meal bolus. It's the dose, is the correction if I need a correction, and that pre-bolus. And maybe I give an example. So if my blood sugar is, if I do a finger stick, 100, I'm 100. I have perfect blood sugar, 100, unicorn. And I know I want to eat in 15 minutes. I would just calculate my dose based on, I would take the normal dose that I take for this meal. I would do 15 in pre-bolus, and I would not do any correction. But if I'm, 200, or even 300, then I would also consider, like, I would add more insulin just to correct that high glucose, and that would be part of the calculation. Just like your system does it for you with InPen, it does it sort of automatically. I would have to do that manually. And so for a 200 blood sugar, I would add extra, in my case, maybe 1.5 unit to correct from 200 to 100, because that's the ratio I need. Then I would do the full dose to cover that meal. And I would even like make a longer pre-bolus time, because I want for that blood sugar to go down before I start eating. So I would not be scared to extend the pre-bolus from 15 minutes to 30 minutes, because I know it's probably safe for me to do it that way. If my blood sugar was 300, I would, I know I want to eat in an hour. I would probably already take maybe full bolus for that meal, because I know there's no way I can go to 100 earlier than in 1 hour with the insulin that I have. So that's how I would do it with a finger prick. Would you do the same, or would you do different?
I think that's a great point. It's one of the things whenever people say, hey, should I get a CGM? It's like, if you have access to it, yes, because it allows you to be proactive, because you can see the arrows. So if you, for example, are trending upwards, you can actually treat the trending upwards part rather than just treating here and now. I think your point about pre-bolusing, depending on where your starting blood sugar is also really, really solid, because basically what you're doing is that you're correcting a high blood sugar and then you're adding
Right.
carbohydrates. So you need to both have the correction and you need to have the insulin that covers the food. And that's I think that's a super, super important component. You can take both of those doses at once. You don't have to take them as separate doses.
Right.
And what I'm also hearing you say is that you think about how fast insulin works. Because
Yes.
one of the injected insulin is not going to work right away. So if it's not as most effective until an hour after injected, an hour and a half, if your starting point is 300, you probably don't have to panic in half an hour. Unless you go for a run or a walk right after. Well, running not for me, but a walk, like do something active. Which actually we didn't really talk about that. So I'm jumping a little bit because the whole thing about the timing of the dosing also is very dependent on what I'm doing after. I think I mentioned it up front in this episode is usually I go to the gym in the morning. I take that into consideration and I calculate my dose depending on what I'm doing. If I'm doing cardio, I might pull a little bit insulin, might give a little less. If I'm doing a more anaerobic type of exercise, for example, heavy lifts, I might usually take the same dose or maybe a little bit more. If I'm sitting here on my tush talking to Tom, I will take a little bit more insulin because I know that I'll be inactive for quite a while. And I don't know, the excitement of doing the podcast also can push my blood sugars up. So this morning I took an extra unit and right now I am at 135. So it's okay. Had I not taken the extra unit, I'd be above 160 probably and not happy.
Yeah. And I'm actually doing this exactly these days because I'm traveling. I'm on a vacation. It's like a road trip. And we move from one place to another, like every 3-4 days. We just move from one village to another or one town to another. And we drive. And because I have a small child, we have lots of stuff in the car. And I always have to, every 3 days, I have to put everything in the car, which is sort of like a huge exercise on its own to squeeze everything in the relatively small trunk. So, and that's a workout. And I, usually we do this in the morning. So I eat my breakfast, and after that I bring up the car and I start put everything in, and I bring the bags to the car. I put them in the car and I fold the seats. I put the bike in. I take off one wheel from the bike so everything can fit in, and it's almost like a workout. And if I take a full bolus with full pre-bolus for breakfast, I will definitely go low, like in the middle of packing the car. So I figured, okay, when I'm doing something like this, I can take a lot less insulin. I don't even need to pre-bolus because I know I will stand up right after breakfast. I'm going to do this. I don't need any pre-bolus. I actually need that insulin a little bit later because in an hour later, I will be driving the car. I just be sitting on my butt, like you now said. And that's when I will need that insulin. So I don't need any pre-bolus. But it's like very, very situational. And that's why it's, like you said, it's super helpful sometimes to think about what I will be doing in the next 2 hours when I need that insulin to hit. It's not always exactly when the carbs hit, but if you're very physically active, it can be a bit later. So, but I have another question for you, Crystal. What do you do when you're like about to eat your normal meal, but you're low? Let's say you're 60, like your CGM shows you're 60. When do you take your pre-meal dose, and when do you eat, or what do you do?
I'm 60. I'll pop some glucose tabs. I don't want to be below 70. So
Okay.
I will deal with the low with extra glucose, and I usually don't eat like high glycemic food for my meals, my main meals. I can't really think of a situation where I'd eat something that's super high glycemic for a main meal. So high glycemic means that it hits bloodstreams really quickly. So in a situation, yeah, I would treat the low, maybe 2 glucose tabs. I might just dose when I start my meal.
Yeah.
But I will not dose.
Right. Yeah.
If
No, I think that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense, especially if you have a relatively low carb meal. It's not gonna fix your low very fast.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's like what I find helpful in these situations is not to get like additional glucose tabs. If I have something I can incorporate in my meal, maybe start the meal with something like a banana or something. Maybe not a banana is not the best example. Something that works a little bit faster, like a piece of fruit. There are, I don't know, mango would be a good one, but that takes time to clean up, so it's not a good example. Maybe an orange would be a good one. And then I would probably bolus when I would take the insulin for the dinner or the lunch when I see that the trend is not anymore low. Like when it starts getting flatlined, then I feel like it's kind of safe to take the full bolus for the dinner or the lunch, and maybe I don't need to wait very long. I can eat right away. But sometimes in the past, I was often almost like shocked because I was low. Then I ate my meal. I took a little bit of orange juice to treat that low. I ate my meal and I only took my insulin after, and that was never a good idea. Like, it was just too late, and then suddenly I was at 250, 300, and that just didn't work. So I find it sometimes. I almost find I need to be a little bit more aggressive with insulin in these situations than I'm kind of comfortable being. And I know that if I do it the way I think it's right, it's usually going to be I take the insulin too late, if you know what I mean. I'm just like sometimes too scared to pre-bolus in situations where I should take the insulin earlier. And the same thing is when I'm like 80, when I'm like not low, but in like the borderline, maybe I could go low when I'm 80 and slowly going down. I'm also like hesitant to do pre-bolus, but I know for me it's usually the right thing to do. Just do the full pre-bolus, like 15 minutes, and it's still fine. I don't go too low, but sometimes I'm just too sort of hesitant to do that.
That's why I'm human. No, I think you're human. I think it's very, very normal to be nervous about some of these things, and so am I. I mean, there are situations where it's mainly related to lows for me, but with lows where I'm like, I don't need eat another whatever orange glucose tabs piece of fruit, but I'm still going to do it. And then I can correct with insulin later. But I think back to your question, you chose 60, which probably was the wrong number for me. So if you'd said 72, let's say you're 72 before a meal, what I most often will do is I will take my insulin at the beginning of the meal, but I'll reduce the dose. If I usually need like 2 units for the lunch that I favor, that I'm currently favoring, as we all know by now, I tend to eat the same things. So my big salad for lunch with protein, I usually do 2 units for. If I'm at 72, random number, 72, I'll take 1.5 units at the beginning of the meal. It is very high fiber, so it doesn't raise blood sugar super fast, but the insulin is not going to hit me right away either. So it kind of ends up even out. So that's
and then you don't need more later on.
Correct.
You take more later on or not?
No, I don't.
No. Okay.
If my blood sugar is 80, I'll take full dose.
Yeah. I find that's the right thing for me too. Sometimes I'm just like, I don't really feel like doing it. So with Loop, which is the algorithm I use, it's actually quite nice because it gives you the recommendation, and then you can tune down a little bit. So I'm 72. It will not recommend me to dose until I'm 75. So let's say I'm 76, and I'm going lower, and then I want to eat 30 carbs. I put 30 carbs in the app, and it will tune down. Like, it will tell me, okay, maybe I should take 2.5 units, but I can manually go and say I just want 1.5 unit. But then it will give me more just in the next 2 cycles, like 5 minutes, and in 10 minutes everything will be in. But I feel a little bit safer, like I'm not doing it everything in right away. But still, the system is usually right. Like, whatever the system is suggesting, this one, it's usually the right thing to do. And I just mess up, I just go in and change it, and usually that's not the way it works. Usually it's better to keep it the way whatever it recommends.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I don't know. I think it's a good thing to question what our text suggests, because sometimes I will suggest a dose and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. Also because it doesn't have full information, in the sense that, as you said, most systems don't know which kind of food we're eating. It doesn't know what we're doing after. So for example, again, the InPen that I'm using doesn't have a functionality where I can go in and say, hey, I'm going to exercise. I wish it did. So the Rabbit Calc, the app I mentioned before, had that. I could go in and say, I'm going to do light exercise, medium exercise, high intensity. And this is it. I think I could also put in duration of it. And it would say, hey, based on this, I think it used like a 33% reduction. It's like, you should reduce your insulin by this, and this would be the new dose. And you can then choose to take it or not.
Right.
The systems, and I think that's with all the systems are never going to force you to take a dose. It's going to be a recommendation. You can override it if you want to. Sort of our spider sense is sometimes more accurate than our devices.
There's one really helpful point that I learned in like a diabetes course I did some time ago. And that was, every time I dose insulin before a meal. Just like stop and think about what's the right dose and what's the right time. Like, don't do just the first thing that comes to my mind. It's like sort of automated, but think about just like half a minute. Think about what you are actually eating, how much are you eating, what is it, what will you be doing in the next 2 hours. It's just like a quick check. And a lot of times that leads to me dosing of something a little bit different that what I would do if I didn't think about it. Because a lot of these things are automated. Sometimes I just go in, put 36 carbs, boom. I don't think anything, and then I go back to car and I go low. But when I take that mental exercise, just half a minute to think about what's happening and what I'm doing, what is the right thing to do, that really helps. But of course, takes a toll on my brain power. I need to use this brain energy for this and not for something else that I might want to use. So I'm not saying everybody's to do it. Just sometimes that can be helpful.
I do think, again, using tech, you can also use a piece of paper, write things down. But my report, so for example, again, in the InPen, I can go in and look at my report and I can actually see how many times I overrode a decision. And that can also help me adjust my carb ratios. So if I see I consistently am overriding successfully, because it shouldn't just be like me overriding and messing things up. So overriding successfully, let's say that I consistently am taking more insulin for breakfast. That kind of also indicates that there's something wrong with my formula.
Yes.
Right. Then I can go back and correct the formula and the tool can become helpful again, because tools are not helpful if they just tell us something that we're not going to do or that we don't believe or trust.
One question I have for you. More practical examples, because there's few more examples I have, but one that's like, I'm really curious because this happens to me quite often. You know, you're gonna eat something, you're about to eat a meal, you want to have, I don't know, something that is a more carby situation. I'm not talking about salad and chicken because that's unfair. But let's say it's an Indian food or Chinese food or something, pizza, I don't know. But something that normally you would pre-bolus, you would do 15 minutes or 20 minutes before eating, you would take the insulin. But you just don't want to wait. Like you're at dinner with someone or you just came home and your husband just prepared the food and it's ready and he's like, we're about to eat right away. What do you do in this situation? Do you change anything about the dose or the timing if you just want to eat right away or need to eat right away and cannot wait?
I mean, if I can't wait, I can't wait. Right. So I'll inject my dose.
But really,
Dinner.
will you change the dose in any way or you just change something else? Because like normally 20 minutes, 15 minutes would be the right pre-bolus. So if you don't do it, you kind of assume that you will probably go high. And it's like, it's totally fine to go high. I mean, I'm saying you cannot do it, but if there's something else you do maybe to sort of prevent going that high or not as high as
I mean, and I know not everyone will have access to it, but in situations like that, if it's a high carb meal and I don't have time to pre-bolus, I'll often use Afrezza, inhaled insulin, because I know that's going to work. If it's a meal where I don't quite, let's say I'm sitting down at a friend's house and it's like, first time I go to this dinner party and the menu is a secret and it's fun and I'm not going to ruin the secret, right? I know it's going to come out. For that situation, I don't know what's going to happen. So what I do is I actually use the same thing for buffets, is that I'll take a dose when I sit down and then I'll add insulin throughout the meal. When I realize, okay, how much am I actually going to eat? What am I eating? And maybe even if we're sitting there for prolonged, like Christmas dinner, whatever, I'll add insulin just because we're eating over a lot of hours.
Right.
The duration is really long. So I think that's the main thing that I do is I sometimes end up chopping it down into smaller amounts. And someone else actually and I were talking about it and we kind of came to the conclusion, like, why not just take at least 2 units, if you can, pre-bolus, and then you add the rest later when you actually know what you're eating, just to get the ball rolling. So I guess that's breaking it down to smaller pieces.
Yeah. So this is a secret dinner situation. Like you're going for dinner, but you don't know what the meal will be. But the dinner probably will be around, I don't know, 7 p.m. So you can take 2 units because there will probably be some carbs, at least something in. What I meant was like you just eat right away without having that comfort of doing something in advance. Because I have some things that I do. I usually don't like to wait, especially with families. Sometimes it's not fully in my control when we eat. Sometimes I forget to pre-bolus. So there are some things I do to sort of prevent spiking after eating. Because I know if I don't do anything, I just do my normal routine with just ignoring pre-bolus, I will spike to 250 and then go back down, which I don't want. I think with the pump, I have a little bit of advantage. I just dose more insulin as part of the bolus before the meal and then suspend the basal rate in the next hour or two to sort of balance it out, which gives me the advantage of like taking the insulin from the future and giving it myself now. I know you cannot do it with insulin pen. But what I started doing also is just like, okay, I have maybe the meal, or there's different kinds of meals on the table. I just go for the one that I know is the lowest glycemic index. If there is a salad or there is some veggies, I start eating right away, but I start eating with things that don't have a lot of carbs and maybe have fiber or protein, because those, I know they will not hit me as hard as baked potato or pasta or something like that, and I kind of leave it at the end. It's like not always the best experience if you really want to start with white bread or whatever is on the table. I need to change the way of how I would normally eat, but it doesn't bother me that much. So I'm like okay starting with something that I know has less impact, and maybe eat like the sweet thing at the end or the carby thing at the end after eating everything else, because that actually builds up some time to my pre-bolus. It's not a pre-bolus, but it's kind of something that works in a similar way, if you know what I mean. And I think you must be doing it also. You just don't really think about it that much, right? Or you don't do it.
I don't think so. I think I'm so rooted in the whole thing about I refuse to let diabetes
Okay.
rule my life.
Yeah.
That I will take a trip up in the high blood sugar as long as it comes down. So that's back to the whole point about, for me, the most important thing is getting the dose right. The timing, yes, I focus on an everyday basis. But the occasion where I'm like a surprise dinner or whatever, I just want to sit down. I want to enjoy it.
Yeah.
I'm not, I actually, I love your strategy, especially the thing about borrowing insulin. I wish I could do that. And I think that's where you just have to decide what is the right thing for you.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're really bothered by the occasional like trip into the 200 or whatever, or if it makes you feel physically ill, then of course, then there's more of an argument for being a little bit more, putting the diabetes management before the experience is just, for me, it's just not worth it.
I hear you. And I mean, it makes sense. I think it's a choice. It does not, to do this doesn't bother me. I don't mind doing it. But if it bothers you, I understand you don't want to do it this way. But I think you can also borrow insulin from the future, because especially if it's a dinner party, or if it's a bigger meal, you can just over bolus, right? I'm not telling you, this is not medical advice for you, Kritu, okay? But okay, maybe you have a pasta, and this pasta, it's I don't know, 60 carbs or 70 carbs, and then let's say your insulin to carb ratio is 10, but there will be dessert, in an hour. You could still borrow insulin from that dessert and already take it before the pasta, and you don't want to pre-bolus, so maybe you can take 9-10 units before the pasta, and then it will also cover the cake or whatever. So you could also do it with MDI, I guess, in this sort of situation. But again, maybe it's not the best experience because you have to think about it too much, and that's maybe not what you want. But I guess technically you could take it from the future.
You could. I mean, you could. Also, I prefer not to, but I do have glucose tabs with me at all times. So if I miscalculate a dose or I take it a little bit too early, I do have glucose with me. Is it annoying to have to eat glucose tabs at the table? Yes, very. It's one of those things where I can get like, this is so annoying, but it happens, right? It happens. So I think, again, very situational, very much depends on what I'm doing and how I'm feeling, I guess. I do like to start a meal when we go out. I do usually go for the bread basket. Bread is another thing that brings me joy. So, but I know it's not for everyone. The cool thing is we all have choices. And I think there are some solid strategies here, and you just pick the one that's right for you in a given situation.
I think there is one component we didn't talk about that much, because we kind of touched on not all carbs are created equal, but we didn't really go very deep into like what carbs will hit you really hard and what carbs will hit you maybe less hard, because I feel like there are like certain groups of food and certain way that we can prepare the food or process the food and eat it, and that like almost always impacts the glycemic index or how fast the food hits us. Or did we talk about it? I feel like we didn't really talk much about, for someone who's listening, how to actually know for which types of foods to extend the pre-bolus time and for which ones to make it shorter.
Okay.
Did we talk about
Well,
that?
how about we start out by the type of carbs? So which type of carb would you pre-bolus like extra aggressively for, if any?
Anything that is liquid, like if it's a drink. So if it's I always say my obligatory thing is orange juice. I say this on every episode, but anything that's like juice, orange juice, or any sort of like liquid kind of thing, or if it's processed sugar, I think that sort of thing is like hits me always super hard. So this sort of carb. And also things like a baked potato, for example. I know that potatoes, when they are baked from the oven, they just quite I think the glycemic index is actually higher than compared to different like preparation methods. So this sort of things I know hit me hard. Or anything that's like the naked carb, like you already explained, like if there is nothing else in the meal, just the carbs, those things. And so for those, I would extend the pre-bolus time. I would even go like 25 minutes, as long as I'm not 80 or 75 with my blood sugar sitting that low. If I'm sitting at the normal number, I would like be okay to go to 20-25 minutes even, and then watch that arrow, and when it starts going down, like you said, that's when I would start eating. And then the opposite are like the things that are not processed, like the kind of like the healthy items. So I don't know, like brown rice is just less time than white rice for me, or chickpeas. I love to eat like legumes, chickpeas, beans, and lentils. I find this actually quite interesting because not only I need less pre-bolus time, I also need sort of less insulin given the carb count. So I know that if I was using the carb to insulin ratio for these kind of things, it just doesn't work for me because I just don't need as much insulin for these like whole foods type of things compared to the normal things that I eat.
Well, you most
That
likely don't need lentils by themselves, do you? I mean, even in a dal, if you're eating Indian food, it still have other things in there.
Yeah, true. That also plays a role, like a curry or a sauce or something like that.
So for the most part, I don't drink my carbs. It's kind of one of those things
Yeah.
that I just at one point. I like eating. I really like eating. And so I rather like eat my food. So I don't think I've had like a glass of orange juice except for lows. It's very effective at treating a low. Also because it gets stripped of so much of the good stuff, like so much of the fiber gets pulled out. It's just, for me, it's not worth it. It's actually not because I dislike it. It's just not worth it for me. So I would say higher glycemic foods, it often ends up being like bread. I really do enjoy bread, but I often choose the higher fiber content with more grains, and that just doesn't hit the bloodstream as fast as like a white dinner roll, which I don't know. I mean, I do like Hawaiian rolls and stuff like that. I don't know if you have that in Switzerland, but Hawaiian rolls is like a really white bread. It's kind of sweet. So for something like that, that's almost in the dessert realm, I really do have to do a pre-bolus. The thing is, I don't eat it enough that I have like a set strategy. It's kind of like a one in a year kind of thing. It's just when I look at it, I'm like, this is almost in the dessert realm. I probably need to pre-bolus. So I think that's for a lot of the things. Same thing with fruit. I rarely eat fruit just in itself. I eat it with something. So for example, for breakfast right now, I'm eating fruit, berries, yogurt, and peanut butter. So I have a fat component. And to do what you just said before, you have to also think about, well, how do you dress it up? Is it a naked carb or does it come with something else? And that peanut butter, I know that delays how fast things are going to hit my bloodstream. And it kind of gives me more of a smooth release rather than that high spike that I might get from just eating the fruit itself.
With bread, did you try to freeze it and then toast it? Because I know when you put slices of bread in the freezer and then in the toaster, they really don't hit you so hard. I don't know what happens. There is some chemical reaction or I guess some scientific thing behind it. I have no idea, but I know it works. It's like the same with pasta. When you cook pasta, put it in the fridge and then eat it on the next day. Even if you reheat it, it will not hit you so hard. Do you also do that sometimes or not? I guess not because maybe it's too much.
I have frozen. No,
Okay.
it's for the sickle bread, which is my favorite. That one I keep in the freezer because it won't go bad. And then I take out a few pieces, put it in the fridge, and then it's just ready for me to use. But that's already a low glycemic slice of bread.
Right.
So again, back to the white bread, it's something that I rarely eat, or if I go out, I might eat it, but I don't go out every day either. Funny, first when you say, have you tried freezing and toasting it? I thought you were talking about the bananas. I was like, what? Oh, I have not. That sounds interesting. But I will say, I mean, again, how the meal is put together really impacts how I dose for it, right? Because, for example, again, back to my breakfast, because I add that peanut butter, that means I don't have to do a super aggressive pre-bolus. I won't see a super high spike. It does mean that if I don't, for example, go to the gym and help that insulin along with a little bit of activity, I might see that I need a little bit of more insulin later on. I might see a second wave from the breakfast, even though it's not high fat, it's still fat. And for me, that's just how my body reacts. So what do? I consider taking more insulin later on. It's one of the things, I see a pattern. When I see a pattern consistently, that means more than once, maybe more than twice. When I see a pattern consistently, I act accordingly, right? So I start incorporating, okay, this routine that's saying, hey, check my CGM, see how I'm faring. Do I need more insulin later on?
Yeah.
Today, sitting here,
Well said.
I'm going to need more insulin.
Yeah. You mentioned frozen banana. I mean, that's also, I mean, I freeze my banana because when it's already too soft and you have like still like 6 of them, there's no way you can eat 6 of them so fast and they would go bad. So when you peel them, chop them, and then put them in the freezer, and you can use them later for like ice cream or smoothie or things like that. So we did that a lot because for a 4-year-old, my daughter is 4, so for her it's like anytime we make smoothie or ice cream, it's a lot of fun because it's super messy when you make it, and then it's like tasty, and kids enjoy making mess in the kitchen. So definitely take advantage of freezing bananas for this purpose. What about troubleshooting? Can we talk a little bit about what do we do? Like, I will be the first to admit that I don't always get this right. So we say, okay, when you dose the insulin correctly, when you time it correctly, you should be able to have that spike like almost like a normal person. If you get everything right, if you get the right timing, right dose, maybe you split your dose to exactly cover those components of your meal, you might be able to get to perfect straight line. But sometimes I find myself, especially with new meals or things that I don't eat so often, that I just like mess up and I spike. And it happened to me. I might have mentioned it in the previous episode or just told you, I'm on vacation in Spain now, and this Spanish tapa, these are usually like things that are fried, and there's a lot of things playing a role in the meal. And I was like taking too little insulin, and I always went high. And so I had to do something, change something to figure this out. And for me, there can be 2 things that I'm doing wrong. Either the dose is wrong or the timing is wrong. And for me, most of the time, it's actually the timing, not the dose, but the timing. With the Spanish tapa, it was different. This was the dose. I was just dosing too little because I would spike and then I would stay high. And then I would be high for like hours waiting for it to come down, but it never did. And I think in this situation, it's clear that I was taking too little insulin. But I wanted to ask you, how do you go about deciding, is my dose wrong? Or is it okay and I just get the spike because I got the timing wrong?
I do a few things. First thing I do is I think about how long has it been since I took my insulin dose? Has it really started? Has it had a chance to do its job yet? Has it really started to pull? That's the first thing. And then the second thing is I always go back and I see how much insulin I have on board. So how much is left of that dose. So let's say that there's basically that tells me, how much of a pull am I still getting? So if my blood sugar is a little bit on the high side, let's say 180, so nothing crazy, and I still have 2 units on board, and like, okay, I need to give it a little bit more time to work because this might, do it. If it's 180 and arrow upwards, I know that's not going to be enough, right? So I do think about what is the trajectory of my blood sugars, but also how much insulin do I have on board? Another thing I think about, which we haven't talked about at all, is, am I correcting a high blood sugar or am I correcting like a higher blood sugar? Because I found that high blood sugar, so if we're in the high 200s, I need more insulin to correct. Well, of course I need more insulin, but my correction factor seemed to be different for that high blood sugar than an 180 blood sugar.
Mm-hmm.
It's what I call, I kind of described them before in other contexts as sticky highs. I feel like I have to throw more insulin at a for me, is a really high blood sugar than just a run-of-the-mill high blood sugar. Does that make sense?
Yes, because you're saying that you are. It's almost like an insulin sensitivity kind of thing explained in a different context. It's like when your blood sugar is really high for like extended time, you kind of need more to correct it by a certain amount than if it was just a little high. So it sounds like you're just like almost like in different words, you would be more insulin resistant in that sticky high situation, right?
Do you
Yeah,
see that,
that
or
makes
is it
sense.
just a me thing?
I don't know. Hard to say. I think I probably see that. I usually blame like high fat meals, because it usually happens when I eat something that has high fat, high carb. Sometimes I blame the infusion site. When something happens with my infusion site, I don't know exactly how much insulin I have, and I know I need a lot to correct. I need a lot to correct that high from that high fat meal, and I need a lot to correct the infusion site. But it might be also something with the sticky high. Okay, maybe I'm really more insulin resistant in those situations, but it's hard to like again to take this apart and say, okay, that's only because of that and not because of something else. But I see what I see what you're saying. Also, the first thing you said that you already look, maybe you still have some insulin on board, but you will look, okay, maybe I'm 180 and an arrow is straight up. Then it kind of tells me, okay, I did not take enough insulin because there's no way this can play out. And I think with a pump, this is what I do more often than I even think about it. I actually check like half an hour or an hour after I eat. I would just look at my CGM, and if I see I'm 200 and arrow is still up, and that just like it doesn't add up that I would be able to come down because I did pre-bolus. I did pre-bolus 15 minutes. Like no way I should be 200 by now unless I miscalculated the meal and I need just more insulin. And then I will take more. I will not wait another 2 hours for all the insulin on board to go away. I will already correct a bit earlier. I think half an hour or 1 hour after eating is like a good time for me to check on this.
I agree. So I guess the technical term is stacking. We're doing insulin stacking when we add more insulin. And I've always been told, and I've actually also seen people talk about it in the overall diabetes community, like you should not be stacking. And I was like, okay, I don't agree with that personally. If your doctor has told you never to stack, I mean, go back and ask them why. Because I think with responsible stacking,
Hmm.
you can solve blood sugar mess ups, let's call them that, before they get really critical. But it has to be mindful stacking. It has to be based off of data. It can't just be like, rage bolusing my blood sugars are high. I'm just gonna like throw 10 units at it. But I think talking to a medical team and having like get a strategy in place, go like, okay, how do I stack in a way that's gonna make me successful and not go super low, but also prevent those super highs?
Definitely. And I mean, you talked about like eating white bread, like first thing at the table, and maybe you didn't pre-bolus, right? So I think it's like perfectly normal that if I do this, I will be, and it's not perfectly normal, but it just happens that when I do it like this, I eat 2 slices of white bread and I take insulin, I eat right away the bread. I will not do any pre-bolus. Although I got the right amount of insulin, I got it too late in my body. I will be 200, but I will not do anything about it because I'm in this situation pretty sure I took the insulin too late. But if I did 20 minutes pre-bolus and I would be 200 and still arrow up, then I would already see like probably I miscalculated the dose. I should have taken more. I think that, like putting things in perspective. Of course, talking to medical team, number one, but putting things in perspective in this context helps sometimes figure out the situation a bit faster.
Yeah. And I think the way to figure out the double arrows up or the single arrow up or whatever, if you do finger sticks, is to measure your blood sugar and then wait 10, 15 minutes, measure it again and see how much has gone up. Because if it's gone up significantly or just up between the two measurements, well, your blood sugars are rising. If it's come down, then hey, you're probably good. So I think that's one of the ways to do that.
Yeah, definitely, because that's exactly what the arrow is doing. It's taking 2 readings and just compare and looking at the rate of change. If the rate of change is fast enough, then it will give you 1 arrow up. If it's even faster, it will give you 2 arrows up. So it's doing the same thing, just automated. I think there is one more way to troubleshoot that is like a little bit looking in the rear view mirror. If once you've eaten the food, once you've eaten a meal, once you took your insulin, and then maybe you didn't look at anything for the next 3-4 hours, and then 3-4 hours later, all that meal is already digested, all that insulin is out of the system. And then if you see blood sugar is now 250, and before I started eating it was 100, then it's kind of clear that I didn't take enough insulin for that meal. Maybe I did pre-bolus, but it was just not enough. And if 4 hours later I'm back to 100, but I see like a massive spike to 300 in the middle, then I probably took that insulin too late. But I might be repeating myself. I already said that, right?
I think it's also a good way of sort of wrapping it all up. 'Cause, like, you look at your data and, you'll be able to see, was this a dose or a timing issue? And you start to figure out how to make these things become more smoothing things out. And it's a lot of it is also experience. I think you can be successful in a lot of different ways. You can be successful in the way that Tom does, by like looking at your plate and making an assessment and then figuring out your timing. Or you can do it my way, where you kind of measure things out and go at it a little bit more on the data side. Or you can do a mix. And there might be times in your life where one approach is better for you, or you might have a third approach. I would actually love to hear a third approach, if anyone wants to leave a comment with that. But yeah, I think overall, super valuable information, Tom. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And I also want to say, like, this stuff, I think it's very complex. We did our best to explain what we do, but I sort of feel a lot of times I just wanted to explain something, and it's like really hard to put it into words what I'm doing. So I hope what we said makes sense. But I think, like, also overall for me, what is important is there is a way to figure out pretty much any meal from the dosing perspective, but it's not easy. It just takes time. It might take some trial and error, but for me personally, it's not the reason to like limit myself. If I want to enjoy certain food or go out with friends, or I don't know, if I was in the US, I would say enjoy the Thanksgiving dinner, which we don't do here in Europe. I will definitely do it, and I just try to figure out the dosing strategy for it. Myself, I can say I have, I don't know, 10, 15, maybe 20 meals that I eat very, very often, and I have those figured out. And usually when I go eat something new, usually it's sort of similar to something that I already know. So like this is my always like first try. I try to apply the strategy that I know works for something similar for the new thing. And then wait, okay, does it work or not? And if not, I know I need to adjust. But a lot of times it just works, because for two similar meals with similar content, it will work. And yeah, I think that was a great conversation, Crystal. I really enjoyed it. And we have not decided on our next episode, I think, but it's definitely coming out in 2 weeks. So stay tuned for that. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and hit the like button, because that's the fee you have to pay for getting this content from one crazy person and one less crazy person on the other side for free. So I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you next time. Ciao.
Bye bye.